Nvidia's GeForce GTX 1070 Ti was something of a final hurrah for their Pascal architecture, but 6 months after release it remains a competitor for the best bang for your buck GPU. New models continue to be released, debuting proprietary features which may make an appearance in the next generation of cards. So, with graphics cards prices now finally falling towards MSRP, it's time to take another look at a partner variant of this high-performance graphics card. We present the colourful iGame GeForce GTX 1070 Ti Vulcan X. Hi, this is Tim from Vortex, and I'm here to take you through a graphics card that adds its own distinct twist to the ecosystem of GTX 1070 Ti variants on the market. In common with all GTX 1070 Ti's, it fits firmly in the high performance bracket and competes with AMD's RX Vega class of discrete GPUs. Both the GTX 1080 and 1080 Ti sit above the 1070 Ti in Nvidia's product stack, and it's oriented more towards 1440p and 1080p 144Hz gaming than high performance at 4K. Colourful is something of a lesser known manufacturer here in the West, but by the same token they're huge in the Chinese market. Their iGame series has been going for a number of generations, and for the GTX 10 series have taken the step of implementing a distinctly novel and eye-catching feature, the iGame status monitor. This small panel on the top of the card displays a selection of different metrics including GPU temperature, clock speed and memory utilisation. Beyond that, the card incorporates non-reference triple fan 6 heat pipe cooling, dual BIOS, and of course Nvidia's GP104 GPU. General aesthetics are aggressive, especially the angular shroud, but a full backplate calms things down a little whilst reinforcing the card's inherent rigidity. But more on that later. Pricing has been something of a bugbear in recent months when reviewing GPUs. Cards have very rarely sat anywhere near MSRP at retailers, and that goes for both brands. Thankfully, in recent weeks the cost of cards powered by Nvidia GPUs has reduced a lot, to the extent that certain models of the GTX 1070 Ti have finally dipped below £400. AMD GPUs, however, maintain a hefty premium over their green competitors. Historically, the GTX 1070 Ti has nestled between AMD's Radeon RX Vega 56 and Vega 64 in performance, edging towards the Vega 64 with certain system configurations. Current retail pricing, however, puts it closer to the Radeon RX 580. For that, you can at least partially blame the impact of the cryptocurrency boom and that industry's demand for the better suited AMD card. So, while we're comparing cards with similar MSRP, be aware that retail pricing will likely differ. Okay, with that broader picture in mind, it's time to take a closer look at the card itself. We don't usually cover the accessory bundle for graphics cards, however Colourful's package offers some interesting extras. A multi-purpose tool, 10-piece screwdriver attachment pack, a branded velvet carry bag for said kit, and, somewhat bizarrely, some white gloves. So this is Colourful's iGame GTX 1070 Ti Vulcan X. Although it doesn't explicitly copy any competitor's cooler design, there's certainly some echoes of popular cards from the past. Most notably, it's evocative of the Asus Strix 900 series, which was similarly angular and square of design. The overall impression is one of a strong gamer aesthetic, complete with unified RGB lighting. A plastic shroud, however, seems relatively fragile. Oddly down-market for a performance GPU. Colourful are naturally on board with the RGB trend, incorporating 2 unified RGB zones on the shroud and a further one on the backplate. Of course, the iGame panel also supplies a splash of colour, though for a distinctly different purpose. All the lighting zones can be customised using the iGame software. As many as 16.9 billion colours are on offer with the utility, as well as a limited number of ambiguously labelled effects. It's not much, but it's solid without taking the further step of third-party platform lighting compatibility. The LCD can display GPU clock, fan speed, temperature, memory clock, memory usage, and GPU usage on the fly. This feature is unique, and will be something of a love it or hate it aspect to the card. While less intended for troubleshooting, it's a cunning addition for those who attend LAN events and want to show off an awesome GPU overclock. And of course, uniqueness has a cachet all its own. As you'd expect from a triple fan card, the Vulcan X is substantial in size. In fact, it's a little larger than the reference GTX 1070 and shares that in common with most other partner GTX 1070 Ti's. The exact measurements are, for the length, a touch under 305mm, for the width, 125mm tall, and then thickness, 48mm. It skirts across the line into being a triple slot design, despite only occupying 2 slots on the back plane. These dimensions will naturally need to be taken into account when speccing out your system. Be aware that it is taller and slightly thicker than most referenced dual-slot GPUs, so considerable care needs to be made when installing into cramped micro ATX and especially mini ITX cases. The GP104 GPU at the centre of each GTX 1070 Ti has 2,432 CUDA cores, up from 1,920 on the GTX 1070, but not quite as meaty as the over 2500 on the GTX 1080. GDDR5 VRAM is connected via a 256-bit bus for a total memory bandwidth of 256 GB per second. As you might expect, the TDP is also a little higher than the GTX 1070 at 180 watts, but that's still comfortably supplied by two 8-pin PCI Express power connectors. Bear that in mind when you spec out your power supply. You may recall at the launch of the GTX 1070 Ti that Nvidia enforced a general lock on default clock speeds out of the factory, with minimal partner overclocking. These defaults, which the Vulcan X conforms to, are the following. The GPU clock sits at 1607 MHz, the boost clock reaches 1683 MHz, and DDR4 memory clock is a standard 8000 MHz. A dual BIOS switch on the rear panel does not affect clock speeds. However, the turbo mode does increase the TDP limit, potentially helping with better overclocks teased out by the user. As with other reference GTX 1070 Ti's, this card comes with 8GB of GDDR5 memory. It is PCI Express 3.0 compliant, DirectX 12.1 ready, and supports OpenGL 4.5. Recent driver updates also mean the GTX 10 series supports Vulkan API version 1.1. As we mentioned earlier, this particular GTX 1070 Ti will edge into 3 PCI Express slots and 2 spaces on the back of the computer chassis. This card offers 1 DVI-D port, 2 HDMI 2.0B ports, each capable of 4K 60Hz output, and 2 DisplayPort 1.4 ports, capable of up to 8K 60fps if necessary. This is also the location of the normal or turbo dual BIOS switch, through which you can increase the card's TDP limitations for overclocking. The lack of ventilation is also notable, so be prepared with good airflow in your system case. Colourful's iGame GTX 1070 Ti strays away from the reference design's single 8-pin PCI Express power and requires an additional 8-pin power connector. Even among partner variants, dual 8-pin is an uncommon configuration and will require an appropriate PSU. Colourful recommends a 550-watt power supply for powering this card, and as always, good quality models from reputable manufacturers are almost a must. Flipping the card over, we can take a closer look at the card's backplate. Acting as both a heat spreader and additional reinforcement to support the elaborate cooling, this feature is increasingly common amongst gaming graphics cards. The Vulcan X's backplate also features an illuminated iGame logo, synced with the shroud's RGB LEDs. Other highlighting tweaks reinforce the angular gaming aesthetic of the card. After detaching the cooler from the PCB, we can give it a closer look. Colourful call their solution Swearizer, and it consists of 3 93mm fans situated over 2 stacks of aluminium fins. The heatsink is connected up via 6 heat pipes which draw heat from a nickel-plated cooler baseplate. Surface-mounted components are cooled via a nickel-plated brass baseplate, relying on airflow over the plate rather than direct contact with the oversized heatsink. The solution is intended to be completely silent in long idle, and fans stop spinning when the GPU sits below 62 centigrade. Overall, it's a substantial solution, but may rely a little too much on the baseplate for cooling components such as VRMs and MOSFETs under especially heavy overclocks. For normal operation, however, it should be fine. Taking a top-down look at the PCB, there are a few surprises. The neat, slightly tall layout probably inherits more from Colourful's non-reference GTX 1080 designs rather than the reference GTX 1070, but components are given plenty of space and the layout is orderly. One peculiar quirk are a set of voltage reading points on the top right near the 8-pin connectors, which will make for useful overclocking and troubleshooting support. The custom power delivery system incorporates a 12+2 digital power design, which is ample for pushing the GPU and memory clocks beyond the reference settings. The driving force behind our GTX 1070 Ti is of course the NVIDIA GP104. This has been manufactured using a 16nm process and makes use of Pascal architecture. It's likely that the GTX 1070 Ti will in fact be the last Pascal-based performance GPU, and a new architecture will take its place later this year. So now it's time to test how well our iGame GTX 1070 Ti performs. We're going to put it up against the PowerColor Red Devil Vega 56 for comparison, with the card running at default clocks. The games being tested are Shadow of War, Kingdom Come Deliverance, For Honor, Battlefield 1, and The Witcher 3. For each we'll use 1440p as the resolution, and Ultra for the detail preset. While we have these games running, we'll also use GPU-Z in the background to pick up on the max GPU temperature and see how the cooler fares. And we're just coming out of that game now. We'll check on GPU-Z to see how effective that cooler has been during our gaming session. And there we have the result. And that's Colourful's iGame GeForce GTX 1070 Ti Vulcan X. Let's break down our thoughts. Released just after AMD's Vega series, the GTX 1070 Ti was always gunning for the Red Team's new flagships. Over time, driver releases have changed the competitive landscape a little, but the 1070 Ti holds its own as the start of Nvidia's high-performance gaming range. We're comparing this model with PowerColor's Red Devil Vega 56, but should note that the latter is factory overclocked while the former remains at Nvidia reference. In-game performance tests were in general pretty cut and dry, with a clear winner between the two cards at 1440p Ultra. Shadow of War hovered at around 65 to 70 frames per second. Kingdom Come Deliverance was constrained to 45 frames per second. For Honor sustained an ample 80 to 90 frames per second. Battlefield 1 topped out at 120 frames per second, and The Witcher 3 ran at a modest 50 to 55 frames per second. Ultimately, this card fairly comfortably outperformed the Red Devil Vega 56, despite its constraints. So, performance-wise, we're pleasantly pleased. The frame rates at challenging settings were better than merely playable, and there's probably scope for more under the hood, but taking it in wider context is where it starts to get interesting. Colourful's iGame GTX 1070 Ti is currently one of the more expensive partner variants, which still suffers some of the tail end of the crypto boom. With a price exceeding £500, it competes strongly against the still premium-priced Vega 56 range, but is less attractive compared to its sibling 10 series GPUs from partners. In the UK, it's now possible to get a GTX 1070 Ti below £400. We were a little disappointed by the quality of the shroud, which felt quite thin and flimsy, but the cooler did an admirable job keeping the GPU cool. If anything, it's owed respect for GTX 1070 Ti, and may have been designed for a higher TDP skew. Still, cooling performance is certainly not something we're complaining about. As a gimmick, the iGame LCD panel is an interesting one, but one that could do with a bit more flexibility. The configuration software isn't particularly powerful and could do with a better English localization. More options, and perhaps even the ability to customize the output more, would be extremely welcome. That being said, it's a unique feature that some potential owners will go absolutely weak at the knees for. Of course, the elephant in the room is the looming spectre of a new Nvidia architecture, especially given that Computex is only 2 weeks away. That being said, there has been no indication that Nvidia are prepared to release a new card anytime before the end of the summer. Things can change, as they always do, but for now at least, the GTX 1070 Ti is likely to be a core part of the GPU market for some time to come. So thanks very much for watching today, take care, and I'll talk to you next time.